Hey everyone, hope you are having a fantastic day. By now, all of our instructional staff should have had an opportunity to sign their instructional evaluations from last school year. And believe it or not, it is now time to start thinking about our student growth component for this school year. Before we send that out to everyone, I wanted to take a few minutes to just kind of review the main components of our instructional evaluation system. Hopefully this is going to help. We'll get started. So within our instructional evaluation system, there are two components. You have the observation component, which consists of 6 domains, and it is worth 200 points. You have the student growth component that is worth 100 points for a total evaluation score of 300 points max. When looking at the observation components, there are 6 domains, as I said. The first domain is instructional design and lesson planning. Then you have the learning environment, instructional delivery and facilitation, assessment, continuous professional improvement, and then professional responsibility and ethical conduct. And we're going to look a little bit closer at those domains in just a few minutes. The student growth portion accounts for 33.3% of your overall evaluation. And as you know, during the summer, we take all of the PM3 data that comes in from the state, and we also look at our local assessment scores, and we calculate those student growth measures. Always keep in mind that the selections that you choose must be approved by your supervisor before we put it on file at the district office. For the student growth rating system that is used to determine how many points instructors receive for the student growth component, to receive a highly effective score and to receive the full 100 points, you must have at least 75% of your students meet their growth target, and I'll provide an example of how that is calculated in a few minutes. To be effective, you must have 51 to 74% of your students meet their growth target, and by that would mean that students would achieve an appropriate learning gain or would obtain or maintain proficiency. For a needs improvement score, you would have to have 26 to 50% of your students meet their growth target, and then unsatisfactory would be 25% or less. You can see the point values that are listed below. When you look at your student growth ratings, you're going to have one of these 4 numbers listed. If the calculation for your student growth comes out at 78.9, that is going to immediately round to the highest number, so that would round to a 93. To make life a little bit easier for our instructors and our administrators, we have placed all of the evaluation documents on the following Padlet link. It's going to have everything from student growth forms to the entire instructional evaluation system rubric. I do encourage each one of you to take a look at these documents as you are trying to determine what to select for student growth. If you have any questions after reviewing the Padlet link, don't hesitate to reach out to me. I will be more than happy to swing by to go over the student growth components or any of the instructional evaluation system. So as we dive into our Padlet page, you can see that there are a lot of columns. I'm not going to go over every single document in here, but if you ever get bored and need something to read, then this is the place to go. The first column consists of our entire evaluation system template for instructors, administrators. It even has a link for the new FEAPS, Florida Educator Accomplished Practices, and that's what our entire evaluation system is based on for our instructional staff. And then it has the new educational leadership standards for the administrative rubrics. I really want to get into the student growth portion. And if we look at this first document here under student growth measures, you can see that for each grade level, it breaks down how student growth is going to be calculated. And pre-K through 2nd grade is going to be using STAR data for their growth component. And 3rd through 8th is going to be using Cambium assessments, and occasionally we'll have some subject areas that's going to be using an OTIS pre and post assessment. All right, we are getting ready to send out the student growth forms for the 24-25 school year. You should be familiar with this document. If you were here last year, we're going to be sending this out for teacher review. The categories are going to be pre-populated based on what was selected last year, and if the teacher is in the same teaching assignment, the category weight must equal 100%. Some grade levels are easier to identify than others. If you teach a state assessed category, or if you teach a state assessed grade level, then your student growth calculation is going to come from that state assessment. Now, pre-K, I know we don't have math scores for those kiddos, so pre-K is going to actually be using the early literacy, and we would just have to measure PM1 to PM3 since those kids would not have PM3 from the previous year. Similar to when we get into third grade, those kids are coming from a STAR assessment, and third grade would be the first year that they take a Cambium assessment. So we would wind up doing a PM1 to PM3 growth analysis to see if students met their target. And we'll go over a couple of examples shortly on how that student growth is calculated. And then you can see the other areas, and I will provide an example of how we calculate student growth for our Otis assessments. So this is just an example of the pre-K through 5. Again, teachers are going to receive this. It's going to be pre-populated. It's going to have names, everything already keyed in, and then we're going to request a digital signature if the teacher is in agreement with what was selected, and then that's going to have to be approved by the administrator, and it would be sent to the district office to be put on file. Okay, in this column, you have your actual instructional observation rubrics that will be used by the principals. I would highly recommend that you click on these documents to go over each of the domains. You know, I talked about the 6 domains in the presentation to get things started. So please go through this tool and look at the different components. I do recommend that you download this form to have full functionality. For domain 1, the maximum amount of points that you can get for that would be 30 points. You can see each of the areas. This is primarily going to be tied to lesson planning and pacing guides. So make sure that you are keeping up with those. And then you can see the other areas: learning environment, instructional delivery and facilitation, assessment. So those 3 areas are going to be the primary areas that you will receive feedback from your school administrator throughout the year. Now, those are the things that they're going to see as they're walking into the classrooms. Some of these other items, they can pull reports. Of course, you know, we use on-course lesson plan systems. We have files that were submitted at the beginning of the year for pacing guides. So just make sure you have all of your documentation. And then the same thing with professional learning. Make sure that you're attending events as we have them throughout the year. And of course, Ms. Milton would be able to assist with any documentation that you need. And then of course, our professional responsibility and ethical conduct. Make sure that you are acting in a professional and ethical manner at all times. So just take a look at that whenever you get a chance. We also have rubrics available for you to look at. All the way over here on the right-hand side under additional resources is a document that I want to show everyone. Some of you may already be familiar with it. Each year, the DOE pushes out their school grade calculation guide for districts to use. And this is how we get student growth points. So on this particular page, we have our ELA scale scores. And this is how we are going to measure student growth locally as well. So as we get our PM3 scores this year, we're going to look and see how the kid performed on PM3 last year. And let's just use 4th grade for an example. Let's just say last year, the student scored a 158. So last year, that student would have been in 3rd grade. So we would look here at a mid-level 1. That's where the kid would have fallen last year. So to be able to get a student growth point for that student this year during 4th grade, then that student is going to have to at least score a 184, which would be considered a high level 1. I think sometimes there's a misconception that students have to be proficient for you to get student growth points. That's not the case. You can move between these subcategories from a low to a mid, or mid to a high, and then the same thing for level 2. Now, if a child is proficient, level 3 through 5, then you're automatically going to get growth points for that student at the end of the year for our calculations. think for the state, I think the student has to show at least a 1 point gain. But for us, if a student is proficient at the end of the year, you're going to get those student growth points. So there are also skill scores listed for math. So you can kind of take a look at that. So I did want to say this for third grade, we are not going to have PM3 results for them from the previous year because they took a different assessment. So we would have to measure PM1 to PM3 for those students. All right, here's an example of a local assessment that was done during a previous school year. I went ahead and took out the student names, took out the subject area. So within Otis, we have preset achievement cut scores, and I went ahead and highlighted those by level 1 through 5. So let's just go ahead and sort that real quick. And so in this particular case or particular subject, if a student fell between 0 to 35%, then that is listed as a level 1. And so these levels are preset based on our state assessment conversion chart scores that we've used in the past. And that could change from year to year based on the school grade calculations that are being sent out by the state. A level 2 would be 36 to 48%, and level 3 and above is 49% or above. And that's just following the same concept that on a state assessment, if a student sure that our Otis assessments, at least our district created Otis assessments, pre and post test, are rigorous enough to where they do match the rigor of the state assessments. In order to determine if a child met their growth target, then we would compare post-test scores with their pre-test scores. And in this particular case, student number 77 made a 13 on the post-test compared to a 29% on the pre-test. So that student was still in the level 1 category. So we're not going to get growth points for that student. And if you look at all of these students, they're listed as a level 1. In this particular case, those students didn't move, and in a couple of cases, they went backwards. So 0 growth points for those students. Here we have a student that moved from a level 1 to a level 2. Even though that student wasn't proficient, we are going to get growth points for that student. And we would get that for those 3. For student 75 and student 50, you see that there was no growth. We actually had a little bit of movement, but those students did not move out of the level 2 category. We would get 0 points there. In this particular case for student 18, you would get student growth points because that student moved from a level 1 to a level 2. And then the rest of the students you can see were in the green and the blues. They were proficient, so we are going to get points there. So we'll go ahead and drag that down. Okay, and if we look at the overall score, we see that our denominator was 87 students, and we had 74 of those students that met their growth target. 74 out of 87. You do the calculation on that. That is 85%. If you remember in the presentation earlier, to be able to get the full 100 points for student growth, you had to have at least 75% of your students meet their target. In this particular case, they did. So you would get 100 that would be placed on the student growth component, unless there were other items that were listed on the student growth form. And that does happen from time to time. I'm going to give you a couple of examples. Let's just say that you are a 7th grade civics teacher. Well, our civics EOC does not have a learning growth component. It is based strictly on achievement level. So typically what we recommend for subject areas like that, even though you do have a state assessment, we do recommend that you use a portion from the state assessment, typically at least 50%, but then also a portion from our local Otis assessment that you're using to track students throughout the year. So you could still have a learning growth component through Otis, and then we're looking strictly at achievement level for the end of the year state EOC. So that was just a very brief overview of our instructional evaluation system. Every subject, every grade level is a little different. I would definitely recommend that if you need more assistance or clarification, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. I'll be glad to swing by your classroom or meet with your grade level to explain more in detail how student growth is calculated. But we do hope that the Padlet resource will help as you're examining all of the evaluation components. And all of our classroom and non-classroom instructional staff, be on the lookout for the PDF student growth forms that's going to be sent out soon for your review and digital signature. Have a great day, everybody.